Welcome everyone to the very first virtual conference of the Association for the Study of the Cuban Economy. This is something of an experiment for us. We have traditionally over the past 30 years done an in-person conference, and of course, like everyone else, we have been sucked into the COVID monster. And so we're trying this. We hope it will work out well. Please bear with us because there may be technical glitches from time to time. We're not doing this to mess with you. We're going to try to make this as seamless as possible, but we are delighted to have been able in a very short period of time to try to put something together that we think will be both quite relevant and hopefully provocative and get people thinking and talking. The conference is organized in 6 panels, each of which you are free to register for. We decided to break them up rather than to keep them together so that you have some flexibility in your choices. Eventually, hopefully, all of the videos of all the panels will be available in one form or another. And we hope that if you can make this is great. If you can't, you may see the videos. And of course, we at the Association for the Study of the Cuban Economy are more than happy to welcome your questions afterwards. And with that short introduction, it is my pleasure to kick this off by introducing our extraordinary president whose vision has made this possible. You see, I can do this from time to time. Our extraordinary president who's made this possible, and I thank her for her vision. This is Silvia Pedraza, who's a professor of sociology and American culture at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And her research interests include the sociology of immigration, race, and ethnicity in America, as well as the sociology of Cuba's revolution and exodus. There's a whole lot more. I could spend the next hour talking about Silvia's work. All of the conference bios are up on the conference website, which you are welcome to look at. Suffice it to say that in this case, my interview of Silvia that we did before the conference is really worth listening to listen to a really interesting perspective on the waves of Cuban migration out of the island between 1959 and now. And without further ado, I turn the program over to our president.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you very much. As you have said, for the last 2 years, I have been proud to be the president of the Association for the Study of the Cuban Economy. And I like to add, and society. ASCE has a very nice acronym. The reason I like to add and society is because ASCE's mandate is quite broad, and it now encompasses not only the work of economists who were its founders and still constitute the bulk of its members, but it also houses engineers, lawyers, architects, sociologists, and political scientists. All of these are people who work on issues related to Cuba under the revolution and also its diaspora. And as we know, the diaspora is now about 25% of the Cuban people. And they're people who reside not only in the United States, like most of us do, but also in Spain. You will see Cubano-Español, Elías, in this session. Puerto Rico, Mexico, Costa Rica, Canada, you name it. Lots of places where there is a large Cuban presence. Our mission in ASCE is to promote research, publications, and scholarly discussion on the Cuban economy in its broadest sense, including the social, economic, legal, and environmental aspects of a transition to a free market economy and a democratic society in Cuba. ASCE is committed to a civil discussion of all points of view. ASCE is a nonprofit, non-political organization that was incorporated in the state of Maryland in 1990. Thus, this year marks its 30th anniversary of sustained study of the Cuban economy and society. The coronavirus pandemic prevented us from holding our conference on these dates at Florida International University, FIU, in Miami, as we were ready to do, but we still hope to hold it there on January 4th through 6th, 2021. So stay tuned through our website, which is ascecuba.org. So you can get updates and see if we can make the FIU conference in January. Stay tuned. ASCE is affiliated with a number of professional associations of the United States, such as the American Economic Association, the Allied Social Sciences Association, and the Latin American Studies Association. ASCE also makes a point of maintaining professional contacts with economists and social scientists inside Cuba, whether independent or associated with the Cuban government, those who are interested in engaging in scholarly discussion and research. For many years, Cuban economists and social scientists have participated in ASCE's annual conference, as you will see today, bringing the important perspective of those who live and work there. As with everyone else, this year's pandemic forced us to rethink and reorganize how we carry out our work. So this is our first virtual conference, and I suspect that it may not be our last. The pandemic also brought us our theme, Cuba from the Castros to COVID, which we will consider over the course of 6 sessions in 3 days. Please remember that you have to register for all 6 sessions if you want to attend the whole conference, but you may also register for only a couple of sessions as you wish. Videos of the conference will afterwards be available to those who are ASCE members. So please become a member. And the information is in the ASCE website, ascecuba.org. Today, while the panelists speak, you can send us your questions or comments. In the Zoom box where it says more ... there is the option of Q&A. If you click on it, you can then type your questions to the panelists. And at the end of the presentations, we will take as many of these as we can in the end. So before I turn to introducing the members of our first panel today on the Cuban economy and prospects after COVID-19, I want to thank those who have worked hard, and I can assure you that it has been very hard work to make this the first virtual conference possible. Only a few months ago, most of us were not able to handle video conferencing. We have learned it on the fly. We have learned it because, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And in Cuba, the running joke is that the mother may have been necessity, but the father was Fidel Castro. I especially want to thank all our panel participants. And I particularly want to thank Larry, Catá-Backer, and Frank Carlos Martinez, who is with us behind the lines, as well as our website master, Mike Perio. Without their efforts, this virtual conference would not have been possible. So Larry will now introduce me, and I will then introduce each of our panel members. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Silvia. I'm really jazzed about this, and I hope that our attendees will find this interesting and useful over the course of the next 3 days. We start with the Cuban economy and its prospects during and after COVID-19. This is a particularly interesting topic because it's a moving target, and both Cuban economists, sociologists, political figures, and the like within Cuba and outside of Cuba wind up facing a different set of parameters almost on a daily basis. So with that caveat, I think that we're going to have a very, very interesting discussion. A number of our panelists have submitted their papers and have been willing to share them with folks. The papers will be on the website or PowerPoints. And with that, I would like to introduce our panel chair, again, Silvia Pedraza, who've already introduced. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Larry and Yuri, who will present the first paper, Cuba's Response to COVID-19 and the Consequences for Cuba of the Pandemic. Larry Catá-Backer is a founding member of the Coalition for Peace and Ethics, and he serves as the W. Richard and Mary Eshelman Faculty Scholar, Professor of Law and International Affairs at Penn State. That is Pennsylvania State University, but fondly known as Penn State. He teaches and researches in the area of globalization, including public and private law systems and the emerging forms of data-driven governance. Larry has written extensively on the emergence of 21st century Marxist-Leninist political and economic orders in China and Cuba. In addition to many articles, he has published a book called Cuba's Caribbean Marxism, Essays on Ideology, Government, Society, and Economy in the Post-Fidel Castro Era. And his latest article is Popular Participation in the Constitution of the Illiberal State, Popular Engagement and Constitutional Reform in Cuba and the Contours of Cuban Socialist Democracy, published in Emory International Law Review with Flora Sapio and James Corman. We also have with us today Yuri Gonzalez Hernandez, who is a Cuban lawyer from the University of Havana, who is currently in residence at Penn State, where he is working on his LLM degree. Before his arrival at Penn State, Yuri Gonzalez Hernandez worked as legal advisor to different Cuban companies and the tax office of the Office of the Historian of the City of Havana, which is very important. Since 2016, he has provided legal advice to self-employed workers and has also participated in nonprofit entrepreneur projects aimed at the development of some communities in the city of Havana. You guys.
Thank you.
Larry and Yuri.
All right. And for this presentation, Yuri will be doing the presenting. So take it away, Yuri.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay
Yes.
right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Yuri Gonzalez, as Silvia and Professor Baker said. We are going to make a short presentation about Cuba is the main goal in this conference. And let me share. Okay. My screen to present the PowerPoint. Okay. So let's talk just about Cuba response to COVID-19 and the consequence from Cuba of the pandemic. So in this context, we be focused on this situation and the strategies that the Cuban government has taken in this period. And this kind of controversial situation between economics and health policy, and also pay attention about how the people, this situation and the future, if this situation is gonna continue. So Cuba, as Iceland, have been involved in this kind of economical situation, and the COVID-19 also came to left a mark, but not positive in this way, negative, because it has been attended directly straight to the economy. Let's make a short overview about the pandemic. So Cuba, despite being a country with a good healthcare system, was on the country, one of the countries that didn't take seriously the spread of the COVID-19 at the beginning. I say so because at that time, a lot of countries from Europe and China was facing this difficult situation, and Cuba and different agencies, I'm talking about tour operators, began to promote Cuba as a tourist destination, ignoring the complex world situation and obviously published data that shows that the number of infections in different European nations from which the tourists were arriving to the island. So also Cuba held a cruiser ship that it was requesting help in the Caribbean Sea because they have cases of COVID on board. So Cuba give help to this cruiser ship, and that is a good thing. The thing is that they didn't take the correct measure, hygienic measure to try to give help to these people and send the people to their countries. So the pandemic started in Latin America at the beginning of March. So after March 10, Cuba started facing with this situation, mainly because for the tourists. So they received 3 Italian tourists that came from Lombardy. Lombardy was the region of Italy that they have the highest number of cases. So since this moment, the number of cases in Cuba were increasing based on the infection, on how infectious is this virus. So that's bring as a consequence that the Cuban government has to take the correct measure, and they start closing borders and developing treatment and start closing the work, the people, they suspend the public transportation and start to advise the people to be insulated at home and use the hygienic measures. So, and this was for trying to stop the increased number of cases, but this is almost unstoppable because we didn't have a cure. So the core challenge in this situation is that the tourism is a critical element of economy of Cuba, for saying that it's the main source that Cuba have for the economy. So, and this affects straight to the development plan for 2013. So, and now the expansion of non-state sector that depend of the tourists because they are the main market. I'm talking about restaurants, I'm talking about different souvenirs business, and that have been affected in this situation. And this address to the government to encourage the local tourism, for example, but it's so difficult because, as we know, local tourism, there is not economical prepared for fulfill this market. And now they have to see what to do to make a new way, to find a new way to develop the economical situation in this case. So let's talk a little bit about the Cuban medical internationalism. So since March, Cuba has been sending doctors and people who work in the healthcare system to different countries. And the initiative was motivated to the request of these countries to the World Health Organization, asking for support in this new situation that seems unstoppable. So to this request, Cuba starts sending doctors that today are more than 2,000 in more than 15 countries. But these have been well accepted in different countries, mainly in Italy, that it has been a good effect. The people really have been recovering, and the program in Italy have been successful. But it's a little controversial because in some places, they didn't take this so well. Because some people says that this doctor have been forced to labor, and it could be, maybe not, but the thing is that these people have been going to these places and doing a good job, because really I think that the world, it wasn't prepared to have a lot of people in this situation. So that in another side, this have a negative situation from Cuba, because now these doctors are coming back and some of them have been infected also. So, and that are cases that have to be attended in Cuba and have the potential hazard that it could be more people infected. So that is the two hands that we have to deal with it. So it's something that, so in another side, we have the medical technologies that Cuba have been developing also. For example, since 2007, Cuba produced the medicine called interferon alpha 2B that is used for treat patients with higher cell leukemia, malignant melanoma, and another kind of disease. This medicine have been produced under a commercial name of Change Herbert by Changchun Biological Technology in China. This is the joint venture between Cuba and China. And this medicine was used in China at the beginning, and it has a good result. So that the Commission of Health of China start to increase the development of the production based on the effectiveness on patients with the virus. In these countries, in this context, other countries as Italy, Spain, and in Latin America, El Salvador, have been interested in buying this medicine to use in the treatment to the patient with this kind of disease. So, challenge. We have a big challenge because in Cuba, as we know, it's hard to control the spread of the virus. First, because the sanitation measures, in Cuba, we have this situation that in a lot of places, we don't have the living condition. For example, in some neighborhoods, people doesn't have water daily to maintain the sanitation of the home, to keep everything clean as request for stop the spread of the virus. So that is a really challenge that the Cuban government have to deal with, because have to be focused on take care of this population that need really help about it. And about the food is another challenge that the Cuban government has, because there is not enough for everybody. And also trying to buy this food, we are not keeping the social distance, because as a Cuban, in my case, if I'm gonna buy something, I have to make a long line, and it's so difficult for me to keep the social distance in a line for buying food. So this is a kind of difficult to get the food and stay in social distance and insulated. So there is another challenge. And about economic reform, well, this is something new for the world, but there is not something new for Cuban people, that we also have been dealing with special situation that sometimes in a time we call special period. So now, as another economical measure, the government have introduced again the dollarization to try to get some injection of capital, and trying to find another way to develop the economical system of Cuba. Well, a kind of conclusion, Cuba have been among the states better able to meet the challenge for the pandemic and infection and mortality rates, because I have to say that Cuba have a good healthcare system and have been concerned about the situation of the patients. I have been monitoring the recovery of the patient, and they the people that are reported as positive, they are not at home. They are in a place that the epidemiological institution have been prepared for these people. So there is not a risk for these people to infect another people. But there is not, that doesn't mean that we have been avoiding the pandemic, because right now the cases are increasing again. So there is not just about how do you deal with the treatment to the infect people. It's about how do you deal with the people that are in the street, that they have to go to work, that they have to do the daily activities, and you stop the spread of the virus in the society, when that the people have to go out to take the food, to make some money, and that is kind of difficult. Even if you have to wait for the water, because today is coming the water, so you have to fulfill your recipient and everything, because the next day there is no water. So that is another kind of challenge that in some way has exposed the weakness of the state, because right now the Cuban government has to try to stop to planning and start to think about something more solid, something that they can do adjust to the reality. And now it's difficult because now we are facing to a pandemic and it's a disease. So they have to be focused on the future, but not planning. So based on the reality. Well, with this, I think that if you have any question, if the Professor Baker have to add anything else, so.
All right, well, thank you very much, Yuri. And Silvia, do I have a minute or two?
Yes, please.
All right. No, thank you very much. And I've noted that there have been a number of really interesting questions. I've tried to answer them in the Q&A window, and hopefully I was able to do that. I messed up the first couple because I pressed the wrong button. One of them was a welcome from a fellow Penn Stater and hello, thank you for noting. And the second one was a question about the percentage of the population with daily water supply. The issue there, and I can just be very brief, and I think my colleagues from Cuba will have better information, but the answer, like all answers, is it depends. For some people, the problem is periodic problems with the water supply. For some, it's quality rather than the availability of water supply. It will depend. Within Havana, there will be differences. Between Havana and the provinces, there will be difference. There will be significant differences between the west and the east of the country. So it's all over the place. I don't have the statistics, and hopefully either Ricardo or Elías may be able to help in that regard. There has been newspaper coverage about this, and there was in March and April, where reporters for a while went off to the countryside to interview a number of people, mostly people who were at home, who were complaining that the government was creating all kinds, the appropriate kinds of mandate, wash your hands all the time, wash your clothes, but there was either no facilities for hand washing or soaps, the appropriate soaps were difficult to obtain, or it was impossible to launder in the way that the government had urged. And that created a little sense of controversy. Mercifully, it did not produce the kind of nightmare scenario that everyone was worried about in terms of spreading of disease. But what it does do, and this is my only point that I wanted to add to Yuri's excellent presentation, was that when you look at the issues that we've tried to highlight, the important thing is not necessarily its current effects, but what is really important is the way that COVID has actually shined a very, very bright light on the structural issues that continue to plague the way in which the government has chosen to implement its version of Marxist-Leninist state planning. And it has done that in a very specific way that is very difficult to avoid. Issues of sanitation are one, issues of food and food security, which people have been talking around for years, is another, and then the issue of economic reforms. And we've seen, of course, the kind of return to the forms, although they say not the spirit of the special period. Governments tend to move backwards when they are met with crises, and to go back to their old toolkits to see what works in order to try to ameliorate some of the problems. And you're going to see this occurring not just with all that COVID has done, in a sense, is to show both the fragility of the Cuban economy, especially we've moved from sugar now to tourism, and the way in which a significant blow to a pillar of the economy can have profound effects. But then it's also highlighted a couple of other things that people tend not to look at, even though it's very controversial. One is the exportation of key personnel. The medical internationalism, I think, is going to take on a very different sheen over the next couple of years. And then the second is Cuba's attempt to leapfrog technologically to a first world status, even though it remains a developing state otherwise. And with that, I'm done. I'll try to answer some of the other questions that I see coming up, but thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add that is some of questions that are here. Yes, for sure, this situation for the Cuban people, there is not new. About the water situation, about the food situation, there is no new. We are talking about how worse is the situation during this COVID pandemic, and also because Cuba right now doesn't have that source that it was bring for the tourists. So now, this situation, it was before, but now it's worse. So that is the main point that we were trying to address this presentation, because it's the big step that the Cuban government have to do in order to see what to do. What is the next?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Yuri, in particular, for a very clear presentation. The slides were very good. And we'll come back later on to some of the questions if there is time. And I would like to now introduce our next presenter, who is Ricardo Torres Pérez. Ricardo holds a PhD in economics from the University of Havana. And in fact, he is right now in Havana, from where he's speaking to us. He is a professor at the Centro de Estudios de la Economía Cubana, CEEC, the Center for the Study of the Cuban Economy, at the University of Havana. He has been a visiting researcher in numerous places, in Harvard, Ohio State, Columbia, Universidad de la República in Uruguay, the Finnish Central Bank, and Paris 3 Sorbonne Nouvelle. In fact, he was on his way to American University, Washington, D.C., when the pandemic hit, and he hasn't gotten there yet. We have to wait and see if he will be able to get there. We hope so. He is the chief editor of a series of excellent papers called Miradas a la Economía Cubana, Views on the Cuban Economy, and he's also a columnist at Progreso Semanal, which is Progreso Weekly. He is also part of the editorial board of the journals Cuban Studies and Temas, both. So this is Ricardo's PowerPoint.
Am I able to start? So hello, everyone. Silvia. Hello?
All right.
Yeah, we're hearing you. We hear you.
We hear you, Ricardo.
Okay, perfect.
Ya puede
Sorry.
empezar. Ya
Okay,
puede empezar.
I would like to thank Silvia, for the invitation, and also all my fellow panelists. I'm very happy to be here with you. And so the situation is quite unusual, but we'll make our best. And as Silvia said, I'm in Havana right now. So if you have any question about how, how is daily life in Cuba amid the pandemic, please make use of my status as of now, but don't abuse the privilege anyway. So, this panel is about Cuba's economy in general and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to share some of my views. This is actually based on a paper that I submitted to a Latin American review, and it was published in Spanish. I will submit in the coming weeks the English version to ASCE. So I also have to say that this is my first time participating in an ASCE conference. So I'm very happy to do it. Okay, let's start. So I'll mostly cover these three issues in my presentation. So I'll talk a little bit about the current economic situation, then a little bit about how Cuba has handled the impact of the pandemic. And but the previous presentation said a lot about that, so I'll keep it short, mostly giving my opinion about the success of the country in that regard. And I will conclude with some policy options discussing what's been announced recently in terms of economic policy reform and what can we expect from those in the coming weeks and months. So one of my points is that Cuba's economy was already in very bad shape before the pandemic hit the country in March. So we could, of course, use lots of numbers to make the point. But let me say a few things here, which I think are important. So one is that there has been a contraction in export revenue since 2013, almost 30%, a third, and imports were down by at least 25% until last year. So this year so far, according to CEPAL's numbers, imports are down 40% compared to last year. So it's a pretty bad situation. Cuba is very dependent on imports for everything, going from food to intermediate products, energy, and so on. So it's a very significant situation there. Then there were already shortages of some basic goods, and also kind of a selective default to providers and creditors. All of this, as I said before, the pandemic hit the country. So the economy was already quite weak. That's the main point. Of course, if we go back almost 30 years to 90 situation, it's still relatively manageable. But especially in terms of imports, we are approaching a critical point. And I hope the rest of the year, the second semester, it's better, but so far it's been quite bad. And then there are three weaknesses, in my opinion, that Cuba inherited from the previous situation, and in my opinion are shaping how the country can respond to the pandemic. One is we still have a quite primitive IT infrastructure. For instance, that's been an issue in terms of remote working, which is online education or shopping. So there's been improvements in the last few years, but still, the infrastructure is not good enough yet to allow, the deployment of all of those options. So there have been attempts to put together some online shopping, but then both the supply and logistics have had issues. So that's something that we have to look at definitely as the country moves forward. The second thing is food production. So this is a very old topic. I won't say a lot about it. Truth is that despite the actualization started in 2008 in agriculture, and there was a lot of discussion about reforms and giving land to idle land to farmers and cooperatives, we are not producing nearly enough to feed ourselves. And now with the disruption in global value chains and trade, we are feeling the pain. And then over-reliance on Venezuela and tourism, that's also well known. And so I'll go back to the tourism issue later on in my presentation. This is just to see how it's essentially from 2015, growth rates have been down. And this is a projection, a very conservative one, I have to say, for 2020. And it's gonna be very bad. I mean, comparable to the contraction that we had in 91. Of course, we had several years of contraction back then. Hopefully that would not be the case right now. But just to point out that it's a very bad situation. And as I said, the economy was already pretty weak. This is in the numbers for trade. Numbers for 2020 are estimates. I would say also very conservative ones, just to highlight how those numbers have been down for the last 4 years. And, there are several factors to that. I won't go into the details. You can see them from Venezuela's economic crisis to US sanctions and the, disappointing results of our domestic reform. You are seeing the presentation. Let me highlight just a few points here. One is, some of our exports have been hit by the disruption in global trade. Cuba is very dependent, I would say, we have 3 features now that are quite, make us vulnerable, weak to the current situation. One is we are very dependent on tourism, which is being badly hit because of the closures and the closed borders. And second, we are very dependent also on remittances coming from rich countries, especially mostly United States. And when the economic situation, gets bad there, people will have less to send to their family in Cuba. So and then we are also quite dependent on distant trading partners. With the probably exception of Venezuela, all of our major trading partners are quite distant. And again, given the disruption in global trade, it means something for Cuba. Cuba is not a member of any major international financial institution, only the Central American Development Bank. We are looking forward to see how that institution helps Cuba, throughout this situation. And another very small bank that is, my opinion, is not very relevant when it comes to the amount of resources that we may get from them. And the strategy to recover the economy back in the early 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union was based on the fact that the world economy was growing at that time. So the collapse of the Soviet Union didn't mean a lot for the international economy, but this is not the case right now. So all countries eventually are in recession. So we have to pay attention to that when we conceive our way out of this. So Cuba's handling of the pandemic. Most of these are well known to all of you. Just want to highlight that the country has some strengths, undeniable, in my opinion. I'm showing some numbers here, and then there were some weaknesses. One is a lack of resources, to buy enough tests and even treatments and medicines. We have some troubles with law enforcement. It seems to me that we Cubans have almost a genetic incapacity to abide by the law for a long period of time. And so we are seeing that, the lack of discipline to follow the rules that have been put forward to deal with the pandemic. Not saying that all the blame it's on the people. I'm not saying that, but that's something even I think even part of our culture that we have to look at. And then, you know, there were three phases, you know, lots of different things as part of them. I think for the ordinary citizen, that was quite difficult to understand, you know, how many Cubans are gonna read that document that is almost 40 pages long and then, you know, follow through all the rules and prescriptions there. It's nearly impossible. So, and also the government somehow assumed some in terms of the recovery. So the number of cases will always be decreasing, you know, monotonically. That is not the case. So we are seeing a recent spike in the number of cases, and you know, I wouldn't say though that Cuba has had that we are in the midst of a health crisis. You know, there's been a discussion about you know, how good Cuban numbers are and so on. I live in Cuba. I have neighbors. I've got family here. I've got colleagues, you know, spread all over the country. My family is from Villa Clara. It's not from Havana, actually. There isn't a health crisis in Cuba. So I think so far it's fair to say that Cuba has been quite successful at dealing with the pandemic. This is a fantastic, in my opinion, work done by Oxford University in the UK. They essentially have created, you know, how countries have responded to the pandemic. Well, you can see the colors there in the legend that, you know, Cuba has applied some of the most strictest measures during these months. That is not necessarily a guarantee for success, but I would say it's a big step towards. Now, the economy. One of my concerns, in not only Cuba, I mean worldwide, has been this tendency by some people to present the policy options in terms of a trade-off between health, people's health, and the economy. I think it's wrong, it's a wrong approach. We are seeing it in Cuba. Fortunately, I'm seeing some change in the government's, you know, discourse in terms of this. So more recently, I'm seeing that they do say that we also have to pay attention to the economy. I think it's a wrong trade-off. It's artificial, and in the medium to the long term, it's not good to focus on one, you know, over the other. I think we have to put forward strategies, alternatives that take into account both things, because both are important for every country, and I would say especially for Cuba. You know, these are the things that the government has been doing. I think the biggest impact so far has been on services. That is clearly, you know, the city is almost unrecognizable these days. And I have to say that the private sector has been badly hit because of the closures and the confinement and so on. And now Havana is back to the pre-recovery phase because of the spike in cases. And, you know, most businesses are closed again. So that is very bad. And, well, of course, increased rationing. Internationally, I mean, our balance of payments already had big troubles, and of course the you know, fall in arrivals, you know, international visitors. You know, tourism is one of the key sectors in Cuba, also remittances and so on. So we had to go through a kind of a quick negotiation with the creditors, our creditors in the Paris Club, and they offered some, you know, relief until early 2021. But after that, there'll have to be a negotiation to see how it goes from there. And the result of this is something that we'll see as part of the package. How the government has responded to the current situation, which is the increase in the usage of the U.S. dollar in transactions within the country. Policy options. As I said, somehow we've been very dependent on tourism for growth in the last few years. Just to say one, just to use one example, more than a third of all investments in the country have gone to tourism, and particularly building a big kind of a luxury hotels in the last, at least since 2016. And all that money that is sunk there, now fair return and a good return out of that. So I think, of course, out of that, the economy will feel the pain for many years to come. It is very uncertain, the situation when it comes to international visitors. We don't know when it's going to happen actually, and then how long will it take to regain the numbers that we had before. U.S. relations, from bad to worse. If you include everything that can be said or can be named as a flaw between the two countries, the U.S. is Cuba's at least third or fourth largest trading partner. So any change in policy impacts Cuba in many different ways. We are very exposed to events of that type, and we are very vulnerable. That's the reality. And as I said, the situation is not going to get better in the next few months. I would bet that the opposite is what is going to happen. And, the previous presentation talked a little bit about Cuba's medical missions overseas. I mean, in a way, we can think of this as a golden opportunity. I was looking at some numbers, and almost half of Cuba's exports last year were related to human and health services, tourism, medical services, and so on. We also produce some medicines, treatments. If the pandemic means a country will pay more attention and resources eventually to public health, or there might be a window of opportunity for Cuba. I do agree, though, that we'll have to revise some of the protocols and the way our physicians and health personnel is deployed overseas. There is a big controversy out of that, but from the standpoint that could be an opportunity for all the people and the country if done well. And that if is very powerful, that if these days. Well, a big discussion going on in the country as of food imports and growing more crops in the country and being able to produce more of our food. But that's again a very old discussion. And the thing about ICT networks now, the pandemic has shown us very clearly why they are so important for 21st century development. The government announced the kind of areas for change on July 16th. Very quickly, dollarization in the economy advancing as a direct result of the current state of Cuba's balance of payments. Well, there is, at least in the discourse, its intention to expand further the private and cooperative sectors. We don't know the details yet. I think that's being discussed, but it's very likely that we'll see kind of a negative lift. They already have been granted access to foreign trade. A wholesale market is being created. So I think overall, those are very positive news for that sector. And then we don't know the details about other important areas like agriculture, or even more important, monetary and exchange rate reform. I think, again, overall, these are very positive steps in the right direction, most of them long overdue. Many of us have been talking for a long time about all of this. I think, one interesting fact that I want to highlight about dollarization these days is that it is happening in a way that provides access to foreign capitals, to capital goods by the private sector, by cooperatives and so on, potentially. I think that's very interesting because there is no economic recovery, there is no long-term development without investment and access to capital goods. I think that's very important in my opinion. I think it was an act of political pragmatism. The situation was bad enough, and so something was needed to be done. But there are some social costs. You know, not all Cubans have access to dollars. I think the big winner so far is the non-state sectors being vindicated and legitimized in many ways. I think we have to pay attention to how at least these three things develop over the coming months. Well, the words I mentioned about the state-owned SMEs, it's a big question mark for me around that. It is unclear how the government wants to reform, again, state companies, and as I said, the currency reform. With that, thank you all, and I look forward to the questions at the very end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for an excellent presentation. You have a number of interesting questions and answers that I have been lifting for you later on. Our next presenter, our next presenter is in Spain, in Valencia. So you're listening to people who are, you know, in Philadelphia, in Cuba, in Valencia, and that is Elías Amor Bravo. Elías is Cubano-Español, as I highlighted before, and he is professor of economics at the Universidad ESIC Business School in Valencia, in Spain. He's also the president of the Observatorio Cubano de Derechos Humanos. He is among the most active economists in the analysis of the Cuban economic crisis and its potential resolution in both English and Spanish. He is a member of Convivencia, which is a grassroots effort within Cuba of civil society, and of the Félix Varela Center at the Universidad Francisco de Vitoria in Madrid. He is serving also as president of the Unión Liberal Cubana. Among the books he has authored are, back in 2010, Economía Cubana, La Oportunidad Perdida, The Cuban Economy, The Lost Opportunity, Editorial Aduana Vieja. And more recently, 2020, Editorial Infante, Economía Cubana, 2009 to 2019. He serves as a collaborator on economic themes with Cyber Cuba, Diario de Cuba, 14 y Medio, Radio Martí, Televisión. Elías.
Thank you very much, my dear Presidenta, Silvia. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar, to this conference of the ASCE. It's my first participation in these events. And before, in 2008, when we celebrated here in Valencia, a meeting of the association. And for this occasion, I have selected a subject which I consider very important for the Cuban return to normality after the COVID-19. And is basically the role of the private entrepreneurs, the Cuban private entrepreneurs, what we call cuentapropistas in Spanish, in Cuban Spanish, and is one of the most important features of the Cuban economy right now. I should say that it is difficult to understand the Cuban economy in the last 5 years if we are not able to explain the role, the ambitions, and the projections of these people who are developing entrepreneurial projects in Cuba with enormous difficulties against the regime and with a lot of effort that we don't see in any other country in the world. And besides, these people not only is developing with enormous efforts, they are small business in many sectors, basically in the service sectors, but also they suffer continuously the high pressure of the government, of the communist government, which is sometimes interested, sometimes is not interested in the development of these economic projects. I should remember to the participants in this session that in Cuba, private entrepreneurs practically disappear after what we call La Ofensiva Revolucionaria of 1968. In that times, I was very young. I was just a child of 9 years old. And one day I recognized with that age that the things that I used to buy every day in one shop, that day disappeared because the owner of the shop was imprisoned. That was the result of the Ofensiva Revolucionaria in 1968. And since then, although in the informal economy existed people who were developed to private activities, basically the basic structure of the Cuban economy was state and centrally planned. Private entrepreneurs disappeared in the economy of Cuba since 1968. And when Raúl Castro decided to introduce them after 2008, 40 years later, in just 1 year, the rise of people with the objective of creating a private project, a private entrepreneur, a private business in Cuba exploded. It experimented a tremendous growth in just 1 or 2 years, and the government decided to stop it because from the very beginning, the creation of private firms in Cuba has been very conditioned, very controlled by the authorities. They don't want the free economy in Cuba. They don't want the private economy in Cuba. And the government fights against these private entrepreneurs for limiting their growth, for example, in agriculture, for avoiding their participation in industry, in manufacturing, or in health and education, which are the basic services provided by the regime. According to this, I decided to develop a paper that you have in the webpage of the association. Sorry, it's in Spanish, but probably you can read it. And this paper is basically a dialogue, an intention of dialogue between one economist and the government of Cuba. I imagine a situation, a theoretical situation in which I could be heard by the government authorities with responsibilities in terms of economic policy, and try to explain them in this paper why it is very important to promote private entrepreneurs, why it is very important to give them help to be success in the fight against COVID-19, and try to explain what is the most important policy strategy to be developed in Cuba with private entrepreneurs, with cuentapropistas, with the only objective of taking guarantees for them to survive to this tremendous economic crisis, which was presented before by my colleagues, basically by Ricardo, which presented the basic signs of the economic crisis in Cuba right now. I will not go ahead with them. My idea is to propose 10 proposals to the authorities for promoting the development of private entrepreneurs. 10 proposals which are easily conducted in terms of economic policy in Cuba. I am not demanding free elections. I am not demanding a change of regime. Just only measures of economic policy to protect the most important feature of the Cuban economy right now, which are the private entrepreneurs, los cuentapropistas. If one of them are paying attention right now to my presentation, excuse me, voy a utilizar mi idioma español para trasladarles a todos ellos un cariñoso saludo y todo mi apoyo a nivel internacional. And said this, what are my proposals? You have them in my paper. My proposals are basically fiscal, economic, and administrative proposals. I think most of them are easy to develop by the government right now. For example, the first one, the reduction of fiscal pressure and social security. It is not only a matter of substituting taxes or a replacement of taxes and social security. It is a matter of, if you are not developing activity and you are not obtaining incomes, the government reduces taxes and reduces social security costs to private entrepreneurs. And this is a very important idea which could be easily developed by the government. The only thing they have to do is to reduce the expenses in the budget, in the central government budget, expenses which are not social or economic interesting. I propose to the government to give subsidies to the state firms, but not for sustaining prices, which is the traditional instrument in the government in Cuba for subsidizing firms. The idea is to subsidize employment and training of workers, because it is very important for ICT technologies and for the transformation of the economies. In Cuba, for example, the authorities are speaking about informatization. They are not talking about digitalization. There is a tremendous difference between these two terms. Informatización is something that we have done many years ago. What we have to do right now is digitalization. In Cuba, they are talking about informatización, right? It's a different concept. You will have to invest resources in the training of workers. Yes, they say Cuba is a high level of qualifications of the population right now. But if you speak with Spanish entrepreneurs investing in Cuba, they will tell you that workers are not qualified. They are very well formed and trained with diplomas in university, but they are not qualified for developing the tasks in the productive system. This is a very important issue for the government too. The third idea is to develop financial aid. Why we have a banking system controlled by the state in Cuba? Well, we can use this banking system for giving support to private entrepreneurs in terms of low credits, with lower interest rates, with every kind of financial aid to these organizations. For example, I propose the reform of the process of licenses. When I wrote this paper, this idea was not on the arena. Like right now, the other day, the Social Security Minister of Cuba talked about the elimination of the licenses for the private entrepreneurs. Very good idea. It is easy to be developed by the government. Another idea to be developed by the government, the juridic framework. We cannot talk about private entrepreneurs in Cuba if they are not juridic, they have not a juridic recognition. It is very important to operate in terms of debts, in terms of commitments, in terms of agreements, not only with other institutions in Cuba, but also with foreign institutions, to have this juridic personality and a framework to respect the juridic institutions of the country. This is a very important issue also. More market for assigning resources. There is another proposal on the arena related to the create markets for distributors in Cuba, for logistics. So I think that this is a very important issue, also easily developed by the government if they want to develop and want to put into motion. Association between different organizations of private entrepreneurs. This is a very important idea. If we create associations not by the government, but the owners of the business, these associations will promote their ideas and will defend their proposals against the government. And I think it's very important that to promote import and exports. This is a recent measure by Malmierka, who said that there is a policy right now in order to promote imports and exports by private entrepreneurs. Nothing more to say. The government can develop it. And the number 10 is the increase of the purchasing of state firms with private entrepreneurs. Many operations should help to these private firms, very small and with a limited capacity to grow, to obtain resources in order to increase their scale of operations. So these 10 proposals are very important, but I think that at the end of my presentation, that the most important one is the dialogue. What I mean with dialogue, you will read it in my paper. The government in Cuba needs to dialogue with the associations of private entrepreneurs. The private entrepreneurs look at the economy in a different way than the government. The government has its position, but the private association of entrepreneurs has another definition of economy. Their voice has to be heard by the authorities, and many of the ideas that these private entrepreneurs should propose to the government have a lot of impact on the future of the Cuban economy. For example, the high dependence of tourism should be replaced by the dependence of internal tourism. Spain, which is one of the most important countries of the world in terms of tourism, is suffering this year because of the COVID-19 effect on tourism at the international level. But the Spaniards this year are moving to the hotels which were traditionally occupied by international foreigners. We were coming to Spain in summer in order to spend their holidays, because prices have been lowered in order to obtain clients for hotels which were empty. This idea is also explained or explored, in Italy and also in France. Why do the government in Cuba is not in conditions to exploit this idea? Why not to promote an internal market for tourism in Cuba? Is it not possible? I think that it is. The only thing you have to do is to clear where the resources have to be from. And the budget in Cuba, the state and the central budget in Cuba, is full of expenditures which have no any result on the economy, particularly on the private economy. If the government is able to canalize these resources, which are directed to many items and programs, which is very difficult to refer them here in this presentation, we obtain resources for promoting economic activity. And the economic activity has to be basically private, because 61 years of state-controlled and centrally planned economy have shown the failure of the original project of the so-called revolution. It's time to introduce a new achievement for the development of a Cuban economy. And I think that private entrepreneurs is the most important field in this moment, feature in this moment of the Cuban economy for developing this transition and transformation of the economy, which is necessary for the well-being of the Cubans and for the quality of life and the level of incomes of the Cuban society as a whole. For this reason, in my paper, I propose to the government several ideas to speak with private entrepreneurs. Many of these ideas, you can read them in my paper, and basically they conclude in one point, and I am ending with this. It is the time to put an end to the unilateral decisions by the communist government. In Cuba, it is necessary to incorporate the different sectors of the society, basically in the economy, to the decision-making by the authorities. If the real government, if the government of Cuba is able to make this step beyond in order to reformulate the process of elaboration, preparation of the economic policy, I think that many things can change in Cuba, and the private sector and the private entrepreneurs and los cuentapropistas, which is the most important thing of the Cuban economy right now. I don't see any other aspect in Cuba as important as this one, will have succeed, will probably recover from the tremendous damage which is suffering from the disattention of the government authorities during the pandemic. And I think at the end, we shall have a very different Cuban economy that we have right now. I don't know how this economy will be, but I am completely sure that it will be much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Elías. That was a wonderful presentation, and your English is better than I imagined. I have been collecting a lot of questions and answers. Let me see, one more just came in, just to make sure that I don't ignore. Okay, and so let me give you some of the issues that have been raised. One first comment for Elías. In your paper, you discuss the possibility, one solution to the economic crisis and health crisis at present would be a collaboration between the private and the public, between the private self-employed people and the government sector. And I'm wondering if you could give examples of that. One of the other people who wrote a question in was also interested in this issue, and particularly with respect to the health sector. Is there such a thing as a private health clinic in Cuba? I think not, but you're the one who can say if such a collaboration would be possible in the health sector. And then there is a skeptical comment from our friend Yvonne Grenier, saying that he wonders if any of these possibilities for government policies that you discuss are possible without regime change. That's a question that sort of answered itself, but but anyway, if you can address.
Right. Private-public cooperation is something that the European Union, for example, is constantly urging to countries in Europe. For example, Eastern countries, which were communist, developed private-public cooperation in many fields. In Cuba, for example, we were talking before about the quality of the water. Why don't we use private firms for providing the water services and sanitation services in cities? This happens in many countries in the world, for example, in Spain and so on. We also have a tremendous field to be developed in health sector. In Spain, we have a public-private cooperation in the health sector. And of course, in the education sector. In education sector, we have the colegios concertados. Most of them belong to the Catholic Church. And these are the best quality schools in Spain for kids. So also we can develop this kind of strategies in Cuba. And at the same time that you are developing this public and private cooperation, you are reducing the expenditures of the budget because you don't need so much money to produce the public services because they are provided by private institutions. This is the most important issue that the Cuban government has to think about. In fact, in Cuba, we found this model in the development of the tourism sector. The buildings of the tourists in Cuba, the hotels, are state-owned by the country. And the services are provided by Spanish hotel companies. So this is the private and public cooperation that is interesting for the Cuban government, but I am talking about the public and private cooperation, which must be interesting for the Cuban citizens. And the other idea, my proposals are 10, is a decalogue, and I have studied all of them in order to be implemented without the necessity of transforming the economic and political institutions in Cuba. These 10 proposals should be developed by Alejandro Diaz, the Minister of Economy of Cuba, or the Minister of Social Security, or Alejandro Malmierca, the responsible of international investments. The only thing they have to do is to have the political responsibility to implement these measures.
Many thanks, many thanks. Very good answer, Elías. There's another set of questions, and I think I'm gonna give them to Ricardo Torres. With respect to the economic crisis, Robert Kuling says, to increase agricultural production, will it be necessary to improve agricultural infrastructure? This is also of concern to Mario Gonzalez Corso. Will fertilizer, pesticides, farming equipment, transportation, and distribution infrastructure be necessary? If so, how will it be financed? The Cuban government does not seem to have the resources to provide those items. Foreign companies are restricted from direct ownership of land and facilities in Cuba, so they have limited motivation to invest there. How do you think agricultural infrastructure can be improved?
Okay, so may I answer or?
Yes, yes, it's for you. I gave you that
okay.
one.
Well, you know, the question, I'm not an expert on agriculture. I'm more like a macroeconomist, like looking at the economy from a more macro perspective. But you know, in general, it's very interesting how the discussion about agriculture in Cuba has evolved over the years. But I want to say that, you know, very often I see in Cuba a line of analysis about agriculture connecting disappointing results with lack of resources, investment resources, and so on, inputs, and so on. Now, I think resources, of course, are important. And if we look at the numbers, there is a large underinvestment in agriculture, you know, building up in Cuba over the years. But in my opinion, this is a two-tier, so we need a two-tier approach. So whereas on one hand, it's important that we mobilize resources, both domestic and international, to increase capital spending and investment in agriculture. At the same time, I think it's important to accompany that process with institutional reform. That goes from the ownership structure in agriculture to the way farmers, you know, private farmers and cooperatives connect to the market. You know, how the way they distribute the products, the way those products are stored, and so on. Because what may happen, and this is something that has happened in Cuba already, is that if we increase investment without institutional reforms, those investments will produce very little resources, very little results. So we saw that in the 70s and during the 80s. So, you know, total factor productivity in agriculture, you know, several studies have shown that was very low, even negative at that time. So there was lots of resources available, but the of their usage was very low. So again, my point being, it's important to find new ways for Cuba's banking and financial system to fund to mobilize savings to increase investment in agriculture. But at the same time, I would rather start with institutional reform. I think meaningful institutional reform can produce lots of resources without a comparable increase in the amount of resources invested in agriculture. So, and sometimes what we see here is that the lack of resources is used even as an excuse to justify, low output and so on. So that's my take on that. So let me say that we don't have, again, the details of what is going to be done in terms of Cuba's agricultural sector in the coming months. It's been, there is almost unanimous consensus in Cuba that something big and radical needs to be done in the sector. But for instance, it was very interesting to me to listen to the president and the economic minister to say that they're thinking about creating a bank specialized in agriculture and directing resources towards it. I hope that in that process, they also include international cooperation, not only in terms of resources, but also in terms of technical expertise that is definitely needed in that area in Cuba. So that will be it for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ricardo. And the next question I'm going to give, of course, to Yuri and Larry. And it's from Natalia Delgado. She says, can you comment on what opportunities for developing the Cuban economy you see from Cuba's experience in managing the pandemic and experience of the international medical brigades to which Yuri referred? Omar Berleni and David Pajon have written on the subject briefly, and as you are an economist, I would like to hear your ideas on how Cuba could use this as an opportunity for economic development.
And I think that this is a question that I would love to hear Ricardo's views on as well. So okay. Yuri and I can speak briefly to it, and then if Ricardo can also add his own sense. It's, and this sounds terrible, but it seems to be the way of the world in the early 21st century. Crises expose both weaknesses and opportunities. And here, the weaknesses and opportunities have been extraordinarily exposed in Cuba's case. And we spoke about it very briefly, but I think one of them is that the government's insistence over the last generation in turning tourism into the sugar monoculture from the 1950s is proving to be disastrous as the post-1959 government talked about the dependence on sugar monocultures. Tourism appears to be the same problem. And so for Cuba to move ahead better, they're going to need a much more heavy emphasis on diversification. We understand why tourism is important. It's linked to the privatization of the state sector. Todo el mundo con la mano afuera, everyone with the propina. But it is still extraordinarily dangerous. So they're going to have to revise the tourist sector. On the other hand, as controversial as it is, the export of human power and the continued development in the tech sector are probably areas where Cuba might be able to move relatively quickly, especially if they could solidify their relationships with their friends in Spain and their friends in China. China has proven to be the elephant in the room here in Cuban economic development, because while it is really good in saying the right things, the rate and extent of its economic friendship has yet to be proven. And so it'd be interesting to see how that would operate. Cuban educational reform that started in the second decade of the 21st century would probably need stronger looking at. There were reasons why the Raúl government went more towards the globalized format, away from political education to technical education. But there, like in Western countries, there has to be a look at and a better targeting of that kind of thing. And then ultimately, Cuba's relations with Europe will likely shape some of Cuba's opportunities. And again, most of this goes back to the fundamental issue. For Cuba to do anything, it's going to need capital, and it's going to need markets. Even if, and of course, and that leads to my last point, which is the fundamental issue that the Cuban government is going to have to confront is that the issue of continuing to view Cuba as two countries, completely or as substantially isolated inside against penetration from outside economic forces, except through the state and state kind of porous walls, versus an energetic Cuban engagement, increasing engagement externally in global production and global trade. Until that issue is revisited and reconstructed, the issue of capital inflows beyond the couple of pennies that millions of people provide their own people through remittances is going to remain an issue. So that's all I got.
I'm just adding a little bit about the Professor Becker says and Elías was talking about. If the Cuba government just be focused on take a desperate decision, will be decreasing another important social field. Because when they are talking about tourism, they have been focused just on that, and that was the decreasing the education, because all the teachers just moving to work for the tourists because they make more money. So that was making worse the education in Cuba. It's the same now when they are sending out doctors. So the Cuban doctor always have been working because they have this vocation, they are professional. So now they are seeing that abroad they can make a little more money. So they have been changed the way to offer the medical service. So that have made the present the professionalism of the Cuban doctor, because sending doctor abroad, they have to force the production of doctors. So not everyone can be a good doctor, not everyone can be a good professional. So if you are trying to develop another kind of economical field in Cuba, you have to be concerned the consequence that the people that you are giving a new education, they have not the same professional that form the first part of the people. So right now, Cuba is in this position. We don't have good professional to develop a new professionals. So these people that we have now, in a near future, they won't be there. So we have to be concerned what we are creating now to get good results in the future. So that's why the Cuba need to diversify and give, in other hand, the responsibility to create new economical fields and to develop new and the society within the society, new ways to develop professionals and also in economical fields.
Many thanks, Yuri. Excellent reply. And I want to just briefly say that I am always fond to point out to people that in China, in order to write the word crisis, you need two characters. And one character means opportunity and the other one means danger. And I think that one of the themes that runs through all of these presentations is that the COVID-19 is a crisis, but in both senses. It is a great danger to everybody and to the Cuban people in particular, but it should also be an opportunity for change. We have another interesting issue here raised by Mario Gonzalez Corso. He says that to attract foreign direct investment, either from small or medium enterprises or large multinational corporations, so foreign direct investment, domestic economic actors must have the economic freedom to enter legally binding contracts without the type of direct state interference proposed by Malmierka. It is disingenuous to believe that foreign investors and the incipient domestic private sector could rely on inefficient state-run IMEX firms to serve as intermediaries. For close to 6 decades, these state-run IMEX firms have shown their inability to perform the basic functions that privately owned firms are able to perform in capitalist market-based economies. I think this question belongs to Elías.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question, I think. In my opinion, the most important thing of all is to put into motion these measures of flexibility. Instead of criticizing them or offering alternatives, which are also very important and rational, I think that the most important thing of all is that for the first time in many years, private entrepreneurs in Cuba have the possibility of import and export, although with these intermediate agencies that I consider as the person who has made this question, which are not efficient. And in whatever case, I think that, in my opinion, of course, this kind of intermediate agencies are going to be disappearing with the passing of time as the business between the private entrepreneurs and the foreigners become more and more important. Because these kind of intermediate organizations generally depend on the government and they have no idea of what the business is. So the most important thing is that the Cuban economy be reinforced with this kind of policy measures. And I defend this idea of import and export, although it might be obliged right now by means of an intermediate association of the government, which is an instrument for obtaining dollars for the Cuban economy, dollars and euros. But with the passing of the time, I think that normality in the economic relations will make this kind of intermediate associations disappear. I am completely sure about this.
Good. Thank you very, very much. There is a question here that I like a lot because it has to do with Rotary International, and all my family members and I have been members of Rotary International. It's from Andrea Washington. She says, from my experience, private groups such as Rotary International play a pivotal role in supporting the government and engaging in dialogue. Many Rotary clubs are comprised of both government and private sector individuals. Additionally, they often seek to address public health concerns, either within the host country or abroad. Is there a role for a Rotary club in Cuba? I know what Elías will say about that. How about Larry?
It's interesting. I've seen the way Rotary works, for example, in the special administrative regions in China, in Macau, in Hong Kong. And I've seen how they are actually quite sensitive to the political realities of a particular place and can work quite vigorously. But China China's context for appreciating, I'm trying to say this tactfully, China's context for appreciating the role and nature of Rotary will be different than that in Cuba, who will tend to, I believe, view international organizations like Rotary with substantially more suspicion than countries like China or Vietnam. And I think that changes everything.
Yes, there's a long tradition of this kind of institutions to the service of the society in Cuba. In Cuba, there were Rotaries, Leones. My grandfather was member of the Leones in Havana in the 40s of the last century. And I think these organizations were suppressed by the regime. Concretely, I think Rotarians were prohibited in 1979. So the existence of this kind of organizations, which are in all countries in the world, is also a typical feature of the unreality of the Cuban regime, you know? Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And also talking about organization, it's happened because even when they say that we are, for example, an NGO, we have to respond to the government, because I in the past belonged to the Bufete Colectivo NGO, is the organization that every lawyer belongs in Cuba. But as an NGO, we have to follow the rules of the government. So we don't have an autonomy rule, and we all have to give we need to advise on everything from the government. So even when you are an NGO, you are not alone. You have to follow what they said and what is the plan for that NGO in that year.
Thank you. Thank you. Yuri, one of my Puerto Rican friends calls that type of NGO a gongo, which means a government-organized, non-government organization. Puerto Ricans know about things like that. Let's see, we have a lot of other interesting questions. Jorge Pérez Lopez has a question for Ricardo. He says, is it realistic to expect that Cuba will do away with the positive list for self-employment altogether, or to expect a larger list that begins to include some highly skilled jobs? Is the possibility of medical doctors running their own practices in the cards?
May I answer?
Yes, it's yours. From Jorge Pérez.
Okay,
Lopez.
So, yeah, well, Jorge Pérez Lopez. Well, you know, the first part, well, we don't know for sure what is going to happen. You know, a recent speech by the Minister of Work and Social Security at national television, she indicated, and I think that was something that everyone understood this way, she indicated that the government is planning to get rid of the list, you know, the categories, the limited number of categories where people can engage in as a private entrepreneur. We don't know the details. We don't know what is going to happen. I have to say, you know, maybe to add a little bit of a positive note to the panel, that I do see a shifting in the discussion in Cuba towards the private sector. You may say that it's out of necessity. Well, whatever the reason is, I see that happening right now. And I think it's more likely now than it's ever been. So I look forward to it. I think something important is going to happen around the private sector. And we are pushing for that very strongly because we believe that it's critical for the country's success and its ability to get out of this current crisis. Now, the second part of it, which is connected to the question, well, that is more sensitive, frankly speaking. You know, healthcare and education are the two cores of the revolution. And you know, I don't find a consensus in Cuban society about, you know, privatizing healthcare or something, even partially. So what is more likely to happen, in my opinion, is that we see the private sector entering healthcare and even education, but as a provider of support services. You know, transport, cleaning, you know, maybe manufacturing some stuff, that kind of things. I think that's likely to happen. And I would add, hopefully, I'm not being overly optimistic. But then allowing doctors and physicians, you know, health personnel in general to start private practices, frankly speaking, I don't see that happening in Cuba in the next 5 years. That's my opinion.
Good. Thank you very, very much. And I think I can combine 3 questions into one, and for all of the panelists, and that will bring us to the end for today, which has been very wonderful. And one is from Gary May Barduk. He says, in many developing countries, much of the financing comes from supplier and buyer credit, often from abroad. Do you see any possibility of the Cuban government permitting this? That's part one. Then from Lorenzo Pérez, how likely is it that cuentapropistas will be allowed to export and import in Cuba? And then the third part from Saul Simbler, what is the reality probability of Cuba permitting investment by Cuban Americans? I don't see it in the horizon. 3 parts, if you can. Ricardo, since I have you right here on the big screen, do you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, well, you know, I think Cuba's financial system, as I said, and the banking system needs an overhaul. It is long overdue. And you know, already that is something that it's happening, because, and this goes, you know, to the second question. Well, the government is planning to allow cooperatives and cuentapropistas to engage in foreign trade activities, both exports and imports. You know, the legal documents are about to be released. So, and in that case, you know, if it's someone, you know, in Cuba, cuentapropistas, you know, may want to import something, let's say capital stuff for its business, well, most likely we'll have to get some funding from whoever is available out there, whether in Cuba or outside Cuba, most likely outside Cuba, because foreign trade is happening only in foreign currencies, foreign convertible currencies. So that is something that, again, is evolving. We'll see, you know, the big question mark for me is, what is the scale of that? It's gonna be like very small case-by-case approach, or authorities will jump in and try to, again, change the financial system in a way that allows for that to happen, even bringing foreign funds to that. You know, again, the second question is already answered. So what was the third question, quickly?
What is the probability of Cuba permitting investment by Cuban Americans?
Okay, yeah, very important. Well, the government says that it's not prohibited, it is just not encouraged. That's what they say. No, that's what they say. That's the public, that's the official position about the issue. My opinion, you know, we don't have a lot of time. My opinion is very dependent on the political climate between the United States and Cuba. I mean, official relations. Right. At this point, unthinkable. Not very likely. But we don't know, you know, as we said, necessity is the mother of invention. And who knows? But I think, again, it's very sensitive to the political climate between the two countries, and also, you know, the Cuban community in the United States. I conclude with that.
Larry and Yuri, do you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, let me add just one tiny point. Every time there's good news about foreign investment, one always forgets the nature of the Cuban bureaucracy, especially in the context of creating the forms, los formularios, el proceso, the reviews, and the management of these things. So it is one thing to say, yes, the private sector will be able to seek capital from outside. It's another thing to see, as they've done in the past, the 60+ pages of single-space regulations that will be developed and probably taken in a cut and paste way from the kind of approval process that they already have for investment by large companies. And then see just how they manage that, because these kinds of things can be used. There's two ways that one can use these things. One, for its propaganda value. Aha, we're announcing this, it is there on paper. And the other is for its substantive value. That is, we're going to make the process of this efficient, either by capping it and then allowing it or something. But here my fear is that if Cuba is true to form, they are likely to export into these new regimes a lot of the bureaucratic systems that they have already put in place for these kinds of transactions, and that may significantly impede, in reality, at least formal channels for the movement of capital into Cuba. That's my only point.
So I just want to add that made me wonder how open will be the government, the Cuba government, to this, because sometimes I have been in both sides. I mean, I have been working for offices in this kind of bureaucracy, and I have been working with entrepreneurs. And sometimes there is not just about regulation, about status, it's sometimes about how open the people who work to the government, they are allowed, they are willing to move forward. So right now, I think that is the time for listening, to learn about everything. And I think that is the main point, because if they don't want to learn about new possibility, new open doors, I don't think that we can move forward with all these great ideas. And that's happened with the entrepreneurs. We have been, I mean, when I say we, because I think that I'm a kind of entrepreneur. We have been 10 years stuck in the same decision, because since 2010, they say, okay, propistas, you are allowed to do this activity, worker disponible. So it's a kind of unemployment, but they find another name, so you can make self-employed. But as Professor Becker says, there is the rule, but what we are allowed to do. So it's a kind of bridge between the reality and what you are allowed to do. So that is the thing. I just want to think about how open they will be to really move forward, to really forget everything about it and think in develop, like developing something. So.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, Larry. Yuri's point about now is the time for the government to listen to the people is a very important one, and it feeds well into Elías, and Elías gets to close our session.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, my friend Lorenzo, un saludo muy grande, Lorenzo, querido amigo. Te contesto, I answer you. The question related with Malmierca measures, you and I know that these measures are not serving for anything. The map developed for the formas no estatales in all the country, you know that it's not serving for the purposes of importing and exporting, but it's a first step. And all the things that the Cuban government gives in the right direction, we have to push them. We have to extreme the importance of opening doors for private operations, for private agents. It's a good idea. You know, the only thing we have to do is to expect that the decisions and the operations go in a good direction. Respect to the finance that go to Cuba for investments, from my experience, from Spaniards who go to Cuba to develop investments in the country, they used to tell me that the bureaucratic limitations, for example, that Larry explained before, are very important. But the most important thing of all is the lack of financial in the inner country, the lack of funds from the counterparts in Cuba for developing the investments. As you know, international investments go to a country where there is a lot of finance in order to develop this project. If you don't find finance, is this the case of Cuba, you cannot develop anything in the country. I don't have any information about Cuban Americans' investment in Cuba, but I know a lot of Cuban Españoles, like me, who are making investments in Cuba and are reconstructing buildings and are opening offices and are developing a lot of activities in the country. And this is something that is happening every day. I am not going to do that, but I recognize that the freedom is precisely for every person to do what they want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everybody. Our time is more than up. I want to thank Larry, Yuri, Ricardo, and Elías. I want to thank all, particularly also Frank Carlos Martinez, who you're not seeing on the screen, but he has kept us, helped us a great deal in this session. And all of the people who sent us very, very, very good questions and comments, we got to most of them. The papers will gradually go up on the website so that you will have more chances to read them and think about them. They're all very much worth reading and thinking about. Please continue to support ASCE and support us intellectually, support us emotionally, support us financially. And see you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Silvia.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.